Order. And so I'd ask Kayla to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Linda. Diane. So we are welcoming with us tonight a new council member. So thank you, Kathy Griswold. Thank you in advance, Councilmember Griswold, for your service on the Transportation Commission. And so relatedly, you saw there was an updated roster for the Transportation Commission included with the agenda materials, reflecting that updated council member appointment. And in terms of attendance, I have received regrets from Scott Trudeau, who is ill and not able to join us this evening. I will now call the roll of the Transportation Commission. Please say here when your name is called. Councilmember Griswold? Here. Commissioner Boland?
Here.
Commissioner Felt?
Here.
Commissioner Fern?
Here.
Commissioner Gordon? Commissioner Hull?
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman? Commissioner Nahidi? Commissioner Parsons?
Here.
Commissioner Sims? Here. Sergeant Bill Clock?
Here.
Commissioner Dolan?
Here.
Commissioner Hess?
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus?
Here.
Commissioner Margolis?
Here.
Commissioner Webb? We have a quorum.
Great. And then we have an agenda to approve. Any changes or additions to the agenda? Then I'll take a motion to approve.
So
Okay.
moved. Parsons?
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 Seconded by? Okay, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Aye. And it's all opposed? Any abstentions? We have an agenda. All right, then we would welcome public comment, and you have 3 minutes, which will be timed by Kayla. Welcome.
Jim Mogensen. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is to commend to the members of the Transportation Committee the new book by Samuel Schwartz, No One at the Wheel. I don't know if people are familiar with this book, but it's a worthwhile book. He's obviously a well-known transportation planner, but he also talks about some of the things related to autonomous vehicles that are my kind of thing in terms of really thinking through how they are actually going to work and some of the barriers that you often don't get when people are doing that. I participated in a group with some students at the Ford School of Public Policy who were doing that and had experts come in, and one of the experts said, oh yeah, at the end of the day, you'll just get on your phone at 4:30 and call your autonomous vehicle, and it will arrive. As if no one else had that same idea, right? That's not actually how it works. So it's important to keep those in mind, and this is a good way to be thinking about some of these new issues as they come forward. The second thing is that I wanted to point out is that the laws of physics override the laws of people, and in fact, actually, people override the laws of people. And it's amazing to me, right? We all understand this happens. People, walk across the road while the light changes. It's astonishing, right? That we don't have more accidents than we do. We all understand that. And one of the concerns, there were two main concerns I have with the new electric scooters. And the first is to make sure that when people are talking about coming up with some kind of guidelines for the electric scooters, that people with disabilities already have electric scooters. Right, and that to keep that in mind, to not, when you're making the rules, automatically not allow people with disabilities to go on the sidewalks anymore, that kind of thing. It's important to keep that in mind. I brought that up at the micro, but there's a number of those things. And the other is I saw at Maynard and William a couple months ago, I actually saw there's a four-way stop there at on William. I actually saw a car make a right-hand turn on red and sideswipe a woman in an electric wheelchair. And one, it was kind of an astonishing thing to see, but the second thing was that if it had been one of those small e-scooters, it could have been a whole different situation. She survived and seemed to be okay, but she had a lot more mass than those electric scooters. It could have been a much worse weapon. Thirdly, about 2003, I came to the Planning Commission, And they have a thing where they ask for people to recommend additions or subtractions from the master plan. And there had been at that time, there was something that had been done in 1973. It was a generalized approach. It was like how Ann Arbor is going to work, but it hadn't been updated in 30 years. The Planning Commission said, you're right, it's old. We're going to take it out, but don't worry, Jim, we'll work on it. That was 15 years ago. So when I think we need to have that conversation in Ann Arbor, both transportation and other things, a generalized conversation that goes beyond zoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? It doesn't look like it. All right, then we have minutes to approve. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Then I'll take a motion to approve minutes from last meeting. All right, seconded by,
Parsons? Sorry.
all right. All in favor, aye?
Right.
Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Okay. You don't have to abstain if you weren't here, but if you two want to abstain? Okay, we have 2 abstentions on the minutes, otherwise they pass. All right, then we go move right into the information and discussion. And we have crosswalk guidelines to talk about.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia Redinger, and I am one of our transportation engineers. I'm pleased to be here this evening to discuss the crosswalk design guidelines with you. I would like to just start out by letting you know what the outline of my presentation is going to be. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the project history and how we got to where we are, the objectives of the project, some of the process, a little bit about the public engagement that we had when we were working on this project, an overview of the project timeline, and an overview of the guidelines, and an overview of some of the design options that we have in the process as is. So what were our project objectives? You know, this project came out of the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force process. And the project objectives were really to develop consistent, recognizable look and feel for crosswalks throughout Ann Arbor. And if you participated in that public process, you'll recognize a few of the slides in here are taken directly from that public engagement process. This is one of them. You know, we wanted to emphasize as we're going through this process that one design is not going to work for every single crosswalk because all locations are unique. We also wanted to help create sorry, the screen over there just went blank and I was like, oh no, we're okay. We wanted to help create a clear and shared understanding between all crosswalk users, whether you were driving through them or walking through them, so that everybody understood what was going on when they saw a crosswalk. A little bit about some of the source data that we used as we were developing these. We did have, you know, we took a look into what the prevailing research and best practices were at the time. We found and decided to really embrace the National Cooperative Highway Research Program Report 562. And that report is a report that it's actually a combined report between highway and transit research branches. And it was looking to find ways to improve pedestrian safety at uncontrolled crossing locations. We also leaned heavily on the North American City Transportation Officials, or NACTO guidelines, and examples from some of our peer communities. So as far as our public process on our public engagement process for this project, we had a consultant that we brought on board to assist us with the public engagement, and we had 3 public meetings. They were in August of 2016, December of 2016, and February of 2017. Our first meeting was really just a listening meeting. We wanted to hear what people's concerns were, what they were identifying as, you know, issues that they wanted us to address through this process. The December meeting was, you know, more of a hands-on meeting, and then in February, we brought the final product. We also had some special stakeholder engagement throughout this process. We worked with the University of Michigan, we worked with the WBWC, the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition, Ann Arbor Public Schools, and we worked with our internal stakeholders. You may not recall, but at the same time, we were starting to look at using the pedestrian gateway treatments. We were participating in MDOT's research project on that, and this was something new that we needed to work with our staff to really start to understand what the implications were going to be and how we were going to work through all of those. Some themes, now I apologize, this is a very wordy slide, but these are the 7 major themes that came up as we were doing our public engagement. You know, crosswalks throughout the city need to be more consistent. The guidelines need to be based on best practices, not on budget. Engineering discretion should be used so that decisions can always default up to more robust treatments. Something that came up that was interesting was that few mid-price treatments are available, and that's true. There are a few mid-price treatments. You've either got cheap things or expensive things or really, really expensive things. Good lighting came up quite a bit. We were, you know, just starting to come, and we're still coming out of that streetlight moratorium. So that was something that did come up a good bit. The need to partner education and enforcement came up repeatedly in this process. And also the need to emphasize crossings near school. You know, we really needed to prioritize improvements in those areas. This slide, unfortunately, is not showing up really well. Hopefully you can see a little bit better on your screens. It's just a timeline over the 2016, 17, and 18 years. The first line really shows the project as it was being kicked off. The second set of bars shows the public engagement process and where that fell. The third line shows where engineering staff started implementing these guidelines. And you'll notice that that started in early 2017 and continues to today. And then I also have in here an effort that we engaged with the Washtenaw County's planning group to look at doing design guide, which was more the actual physical structure of everything that went into place that would be consistent throughout the county. We had put publishing our guidelines on hold as we were starting to work into that process with them. You'll notice that process did stop in early 2018. We hit a little bit of a wall when the Federal Highway Administration decided to revoke the interim approval for rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RRFBs. We hit a bit of a wall at that point because we were trying to decide, each individual agency was trying to decide what our own take on a pedestrian activated warning system would then look like. Fortunately, we didn't have to finish figuring that out because situation changed, the intellectual property cleared up, and the RRFBs received interim approval again, so we're able to keep installing those. I've also noted on here just when our transportation department got kicked off. So now into the meat of things, you know, the transportation guidelines. This figure is kind of the overarching flow of how the decision goes, but it's unwieldy. So let's look at it in chunks. For the guidelines process, you know, the first thing that you have to do is you have to start with the request. And the request can come from a variety of different places. It can come from an individual who has called us and said, I really want to be able to cross the street here. It can come from a group. It can come from internal staff. It can come from one of our planning documents. It can come from the school district or an advocacy group. So once we've received that request, staff evaluates it to decide if it makes sense within the transportation network. Are we serving a need? Is it a safe location as far as sight distance and stopping sight distance? Can we provide lighting in this location? After that, that's when we get into the nuts and bolts of looking at the actual design. The first thing that we have to look at is whether or not it's a controlled location, because those are two separate branches. And I'll walk through the uncontrolled locations first. Once you've decided, okay, we're looking at an uncontrolled location, you need to decide if it is a low-volume street or not low-volume street. The design breakpoint for that is 1,500 vehicles per day. If it's under 1,500 vehicles per day, it becomes a standard design unless there's some other extenuating circumstance that needs to be considered, and we don't go through the NCHRP process. If it's over 1,500 vehicles per day, that's when we go ahead and we apply that NCHRP process. Now, part of that research produced this tool that is an Excel spreadsheet, and it looks at vehicle volumes, pedestrian volumes, vehicle speeds. It looks at walking speed. It looks at whether you have a good yielding rate or a low yielding rate. And it gives you some output. And that output is really looking at, are you meeting signal warrants for that hour? What does the pedestrian delay look like? So it's really analyzing the conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. As I said, we apply that tool, and then if part of the output is that the signal warrant is met for that hour, we'll then go ahead and do a full signal warrant for that crossing, full 8-hour warrants, take a look at things and see what's going on. Once we've gotten to this point, if there's anything special we need to consider, like we're adjacent to a school or it's on a designated school walk route in their walking route plan that's published, or we have a crash history, then we look at bumping up design categories at that point. So next, let's walk through some of the controlled locations. What are controlled locations? Controlled locations are places with stop signs. They are places where we have a roundabout or a traffic signal. And this the design categories for this half of the tree are really more based on crashes and vulnerable road users. And also systemic application. So if we have a problem that we found in other areas and we've decided that we're fixing all of these locations of this type, that's a systemic application that we're going to be looking at. So then how do we select the design devices? This is a copy of the uncontrolled crossings, and this is information that you did receive in your packet. So once you have a design category, you can select devices based on the type of facility you're looking at, because local streets are not going to have the same type of devices at a certain design category that a higher functional classification roadway have, such as an arterial or even a collector street. So as you're looking at this selection of devices, it's important to keep in mind that items accumulate from left to right. So if you start in standard and your marking would be a standard marking, but you're moving up a category, then you could be looking at things like if you're in the collector, you're looking at high visibility markings. And when you go up to Standard Plus, you're adding those warning signs. You're not subtracting anything. So you're adding things. You'll notice that the categories have more items in it than will necessarily occur at any single given crosswalk. So those items are like a laundry list of these are the types of things that you should be looking at. You're probably not going to be installing both a crossing island and a set of bump outs at the same location. You're going to pick one or the other. Similar type situation for our controlled locations, where we have a smaller list of selections. And a lot of that has to do with the control of the intersection, because uncontrolled locations, by their nature, the vehicular traffic is not controlled. So you're looking at escalating levels of warning and drawing the driver's attention to the presence of the non-motorized user. At controlled locations, you're looking at using the actual control device that's controlling vehicular behavior to really you're relying on that a little bit more, although there are some things that we can be tweaking, particularly when you're looking at the signals, because there are different types of signal phasing that we can use to enhance pedestrian safety. That's my short spiel, and I would love to answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. This was super helpful. So the first thing, you start out with requests, and you said they could come from anywhere. And I wonder, like, when I hear people complaining, I'm not sure what to tell them to do, how to make a request. What's the best way to make a request?
A lot of our requests come in, honestly, a lot of our requests come in through CityWorks, through
Is that
A2
that
Fix
click
It.
thing? Yeah.
Yep.
So I hear people complaining that that doesn't always work. So is that the best way?
When a request comes in, it does go onto the request list.
Okay.
And we have a list of, that we're working through. So if it comes in and it's a new request that we've never had a request on that location for, then it's going to get added down in the list and as we're working through it. So some of the stuff that we're working through right now are more corridor treatments, because we have several corridors that we have requests on along the corridor. So we really want to look at creating a consistent feel for that corridor. So we've been focusing on that a little bit. You'll have noticed this past year that we have made corridor-wide changes on like Liberty and Miller. And we brought, those were all, two of those types of projects that we worked on.
So that was another question I had. So that you said corridor, how does that fit this classification of collector and major and minor arterials?
Streets don't often change classification as far as where they sit in the hierarchy of access to mobility, which is what that functional classification is kind of set on, unless you have a major change. So an example would be 7th Street, south of SIO, it's a different classification than it is north of SIO, because it's a much different function in the transportation system. So those categories generally apply to the whole corridor.
Okay, so corridor isn't a functional category like collector or arterial. Is that right? Is that what
No,
you're saying?
it's not. It just
Okay.
means like along the street.
So for example, Miller, where does it fall in this classification?
Miller is an arterial.
Arterial. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Cynthia, thank you. Could you give a brief description of what the NCHRP 562 actually is?
Well, it's a research document. And what they were looking at was the types of pedestrian crashes that occur at uncontrolled crossings. And as I mentioned previously, it was a joint effort between highway research and transit research. And the reason for that is that a lot of non-motorized crashes that are occurring in facilities or near crosswalks or, those types of crossing locations tend to happen in locations that are serving transit. So this is a newer focus of FHWA and some of their education efforts that they're doing right now. A lot of it comes out of this research. But it is intended to provide practitioners with a set of tools to address safety concerns at these uncontrolled locations.
Is this a way to look at the data that's collected, or is it like the toolbox? I'm a little bit confused about.
It's a toolbox.
Okay.
It is a toolbox, but they did coming out of that research, they developed ways to look at the data, which is where that spreadsheet tool comes out of.
Is it this that determines what level of intervention?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think that's what I'm trying to understand is where that comes.
Yeah, so that's the tool that we're able to plug in our vehicular volumes, our pedestrian volumes, speeds, walking speed. So if we have a local population that we know has a walking speed that's lower than your average walking speed,
Okay.
then we can drop that speed down so that we're being more sensitive to that location.
Okay.
This tool does have a lower limit of 20 pedestrians per hour. The FHWA considers that to be a guideline, and that is not necessarily a guideline that we even look at. We acknowledge that if you build it, they will come.
Okay.
So when I am running these numbers, unless it's a location where I know that the volume is higher and we've gone out and we've collected data, we will often run this analysis at that 20 just to get that result. The thing that's really neat about it is that you can play with the factors a little bit to understand the sensitivity. So you can say, all right, well, how many more pedestrians will it be before we start to bump into that next design level? Or how many vehicles will it be before we just need to bump into that next design level? That has proven to be particularly useful in the transportation impact review process, because you have a tool that now allows us to look at not only quantitatively looking at vehicular impacts, but also we're able to look at those non-motorized impacts as well.
Cool. I do think that's going to address then the second follow-up, that I compared our version to Boulder's, and I noticed that there's a lot of similarities. But Boulder, anytime there's a multi-use path crossing, that it just automatically goes to Crosswalk. And so we don't have that, but it sounds like that might be the answer, is that it's not strict guidelines. It can bring in future potential use.
You
into the
mean as
play.
far as when we install
Yeah.
when we choose to install a crossing, whatever that looks like?
Yeah.
We look at more of the transportation system and the network and whether or not it makes sense to have a crossing there. So are we addressing a desire line? Are we at an intersection that should have a crosswalk anyways and it just needs to be installed? Those are the types of things that we're looking at when we're deciding whether or not to put a crosswalk in. We aren't using that volume criteria to really okay, we don't have 20 PEDs, we're not installing anything. No, we don't use that criteria for that.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Howard?
I wanted to address the concern about A2 Fix-It. I think we're well aware that there are some problems in the tool. When people lose confidence in the tool, it's not really valuable. So I've asked our assistant city administrator to dig into it and make sure that when things are submitted that can't be addressed as a simple work request, that there's still a follow-up back to the requester,
that's
and to
great.
validate that the request enters into either the capital program or into the process that Cynthia just went through, and that there's not only is there a follow-up, but there's a point of contact included. And then also to make sure that we don't let things sit in the system, so that, because it's not something that's easily done. It's really meant for quick turnaround, and if something doesn't fit in that category, we owe the requester a response to that. So your concerns have been duly noted, and we're going to, because among other things, we're going to start reporting on using that as a reporting tool back to council as well.
Oh, fabulous, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kathy?
First thing is I am holding a new report, and it's the A2 Fix-It data. And it shows for a month of tickets, how many were created, closed, average days to close, and remaining open. And it's really fabulous. It's out on the website. I don't know how many months it's been out there, but I think that this will answer some of the questions. So I'm thrilled about that. I read through the 562 report, and the one I found on the internet was from 2006. I mean, it still seemed relevant, but I'm just wondering if there's a newer one that I didn't find.
There's a lot of active research in this area, and it's something that is, to be honest with you, changing almost monthly.
Right.
So there's a lot of research that's out there. A good source, if you want to see some of the most up-to-date research, is to be looking at the NACDA website, because they're constantly posting the relevant material, so it's a little bit easier to parse through stuff that's going on. There are a lot of things that are in that NCHRP 562 report that I don't feel necessarily are still held as valid, like that 20 pedestrians per hour bottom limit. You know, that's not something that practitioners are really using as much, particularly with local agencies. And but the majority of the tools that are in there, they are still very valid, and particularly looking at the pedestrian delay and the signal warrants and that stuff, and that's in the spreadsheet that we're using, all of that data is still valid.
Oh, okay, thanks.
If you're interested in reading something that's really buzzing in the pedestrian realm right now, the research that we participated in with MDOT, the pedestrian guidelines research, and the accompanying practitioner's guide has received national accolades. So it's being recognized as a groundbreaker, so.
Oh, okay, is that on the web somewhere, or
It's on MDOT's website.
on MDOT? Oh, okay, great. And my last question is, are there plans in the future to add illumination as one of the crosswalk design guidelines, or is there just the assumption we should always have illumination at crosswalks?
I think that's a really great question. The crosswalk design guidelines do not specifically address illumination. We do also have our streetlight asset management team that is looking at addressing the illumination component. Right now, what we're doing in practice is if we are creating a new crossing that is on anything other than a local residential street, we are looking at including lighting as part of the initial design for those new crossings. If it's an existing crossing and it could stand to have some enhancements in place, we are putting those in place. Even if we need to have the lighting catch up with it, there's no reason to hold up some of those other enhancements until the lighting can catch up to it.
Oh, okay, so that's like on North Maple Road. There's a new crosswalk there, and you're saying lighting is coming?
Yeah, in that case, with those new crosswalks, we would design for the lighting as well.
Okay, thanks.
A couple of questions. One of them was about the signage itself, because it's not mentioned in what you presented. And some of the criticisms I've heard are that the signs are different colors and they're different shapes, and there isn't consistency about like notifying of a pedestrian crossing coming up or anything like that. Is that being retrofitted as you go, that you're changing the signs to be consistent, or what's happening with that? Like on Stadium, you have white signs that say pedestrian crossing, and then most of the rest of the city has yellow, and some of them.
What you're talking about, I think, are perhaps actually two different sign types.
Okay.
Because there is a square stop here for pedestrian sign that is a black on white, and that black on white indicates that it's a regulatory sign, so it has the force of law behind it. As far as all of our pedestrian and school crossing warning signs, we have been using, we've been using the fluorescent yellow-green color for a while now. I believe that everything has been changed over. If it hasn't been changed over at this point, I encourage someone to point that out to me, because it's just been an omission.
Okay, so that's the intent. And I'm wondering about the design of those signs, and if you're restricted in any way, because for instance, when I drive by the sign that says school zone 25 miles per hour during these hours, I can never read the hours.
Yeah.
And can we, and I consider that a pedestrian safety issue, not just a driver issue, but do we have the ability to make those signs larger, or what?
Yeah, that's one of those things where those hours, they are really incredibly difficult to read. And there are design standards for creating those signs, and they're just really incredibly difficult to read. An initiative that we are currently engaged in as staff is that we are looking at installing more of the active systems for those reduced speed school zones, so that you'll see more of the, reduced speed school, 25 mile per hour, like when flashing, having the active flasher with probably like the speed feedback signs as well. We're looking at a couple of different designs and getting all of that figured out right now. So we'll have more of that rolling out probably next year.
Okay. And some of the inconsistencies that I've heard about but have not looked at is people aren't really aware of what a stop bar is. And people have claimed, well, there's no sign there, and I go and check, and like, well, there is actually. And so are those signs being changed or modified in any way, or how, is that on your radar at all?
As far as the stop here for ped signs,
That people don't know about stop bars, what they mean.
what they mean, that
And
here's.
they're not seeing, apparently, some of the signage for them either.
Yeah, one of the things that the researcher that we've been working with through the Changing Driver Behavior Study has been looking at is, he does a lot of pedestrian research, and it ties into both of the projects that we've worked with him on, but he's looking at trying to get approval to take those in-lane signs and install them much further in front of the crossings, to install them more at where that stop bar is. Because the stop bars are normally used at uncontrolled crossings where you have multi-threat locations.
Right.
So you have more than one lane approaching in each direction. And because that sign, it's kind of way up here, and you're not necessarily looking for it. But those in-lane signs are so effective that they did some experimentation with pulling it back a little bit, and they found that increased the stopping distance from the
And where would that
crosswalk.
approval come from?
Federal Highway Administration, we need to, they
that's right.
either need to update the manual of uniform traffic control devices or issue another interim approval for that use.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my last question is about sort of the context of this. Have these design guidelines been around for a while, or is this new? Are you going through different approval processes? So where is this?
So we finished the original project up in 2017.
Okay.
And as I said previously, we were going to go ahead and publish them, but then we paused because we started engaging in this countywide process. And the thing that was really exciting about the countywide process was that we heard from MDOT that if we had this countywide process and that we were all in agreement that this was the way we did things, then they would follow our lead. And it kind of sprang out of the Reimagine Washtenaw project. So Nathan Voigt was leading that initiative, and we were making some good process, and then the
Right.
big interim approval revoke
So it is
came.
fairly new,
Yeah, but
with some bumps.
we've been using it since we finished up the project.
Right.
As staff, we have been using it. We have asked new developments that were coming in to evaluate nearby crosswalks with the tool. And it's been useful.
And it will take a little while for the general public to catch up to realize that it's being done.
Yeah, I think, we've had a lot of change that's been going on over the last couple of years, and they're smaller things, right? It's wider deployment of the pedestrian gateway treatments. It's changing out, we went through and we swapped out all of our S1-1s and got them up to current specs and retroreflectivity in the colors, and which are the school signs. And, there's been a lot that's been going on, but because they're not big flashy projects, it's a little bit harder to see that it's happening.
Any other questions? We're kind of running into time. All right. Well, thank you very much for the update. I appreciate it. All right, then we're going to be talking about the CIP committee. And you have a proposal which basically we just want an affirmative vote on, if you're so inclined, that you've reviewed this and you want the committee to continue. And if there's any change in committee members, my observation is that the three of us are working well together. And we take turns being prepared or not. So any comments or questions about the CIP committee or changes that you would considered? My fellow committee members want to say anything? And again, it's been really great
Yeah.
to work with the staff and to get those details. And not all of them are being brought back to the commission, but we've had just a really great experience learning as well as getting to know what's going on and
Yeah,
working together.
including last Friday, an hour and a half working with staff and setting up, what this year's CIP discussion's going to look like. I thought a really, really good meeting. Yeah.
So any comments or requests? Okay, then we can take a motion to, what would be a motion, Kayla, to accept the charter and then continue the membership?
Yeah, I think that is appropriate. There aren't any changes from last year's charter to this year's charter, but I think it's fine to accept it, renew it, however you want to phrase that. Maybe it's renew the charter with existing.
Great, motion to
maintaining
renew with the
existing
current membership. I need a motion. Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have a unanimous vote then. Great. And the next item on the agenda is the Micromobility Committee, which is going to ask us to approve the vision that you have, the vision values that you have so far, which was included in your packet as well. Is that correct?
There are 2 agenda items, I believe, and
Okay.
I'm not sure, I don't have that in front of me to see what order they're in, but one is to accept the vision, the statement of values.
Yes.
And then the next is the appointment of the
Yes.
community member. Okay.
Did you want to speak about that, Molly?
Sure, I was looking for Scott, but he's not.
He's,
Glad I made it, I'm also slightly ill. Okay, yeah, so our thinking with the statement of values was to sort of articulate what was gonna be guiding our approach to trying to regulate the, not just the scooters, but other forms of micromobility that are likely to come out in the near future, before we actually got down to trying to come up with how we might think about making recommendations to council to regulate them. We wanted to sort of make sure that we were coming at it from a certain set of values. And that's what we've articulated here. Some of this language, I think, is actually straight from the charge for this committee. So it's, some of it is probably familiar to all of you. We went through a couple rounds of revisions with city staff to make sure that we were articulating things well and aligning with the various needs that were going to come up for the people actually doing the work. I think that covers it.
okay. Any comments or questions or additions to the values part?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I've mentioned it here a couple times, and what I'd love to see as part of the values is adding some language about improving or reducing congestion and demand on parking. It would be great to have a piece of that in here.
Okay.
Good point.
All right. And I think that my only comment was that I'd like to see the disability component be emphasized a little bit more. It's there,
Yep.
and I think that with our next action, we may have that, that voice being heard, and we'll make sure that you do that.
Okay.
And I think especially that the contractors coming into the city will be asked to provide for considering disability components in their micromobility. Accessibility of micromobility. Any other suggestions or comments?
So, are you looking to make a motion today on the statement of values? Molly, do you feel that you have the direction you would need to incorporate those revisions that were offered? Or do you want to bring a revised statement to January's meeting?
Let's bring a revised statement to January's meeting.
Okay.
Let's make sure we get those two
Get it
pieces
right.
in there correctly, and then I don't think there's a hurry on that.
Yeah.
We just wanted to
Okay.
get it in front of this commission now, so that in January we can begin working on more of the specifics. So,
Sounds great.
An agreement that they're headed in the right direction as far as the,
right, I think the
Yes.
general sense that we're on the right track would be great.
I see
Okay,
head nodding.
Very
Okay.
much. Yep.
I'll take that.
Okay, not, if you don't agree, then let them know.
Okay,
Good, thank you for the work.
yeah, thank you.
And then we have a new member who'd like to join that committee, and you have a little tiny bit of bio. Can we add anything to that bio, or ready to go ahead and make a motion?
I don't have anything to add. I believe that member of the public was here but left.
Okay,
The member of the public that was here during public comment is not the
Oh,
same person as
right.
Larry Keeler is
Okay.
the gentleman who has volunteered to serve on the
Right.
micromobility committee.
Yep.
I think Jim was the name of our
Oh,
guest
yeah.
speaker.
You're right.
okay,
Yeah, he came to one of our meetings, though.
He did.
Yep.
You are right.
Mm-hmm.
then I'll take a motion to appoint him to that committee. I'll move it. Okay, seconded by,
Kleinman?
all right. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? By unanimous agreement, we have a new member to that committee. Thank you. All right. And then we're going to talk about the policy agenda input. There hasn't been a lot of enthusiasm for this document yet. What would you like from us, Kayla?
So I pulled in what you've given me, which is not particularly expansive, but it hits on a few key topics. This is due back to the commission's coordinator tomorrow. So we can't, I think that we'll need to decide in the meetings here if you want to accept the language that I dropped into the commission response, or add any additional narrative, then we should discuss that now. So what, the response, I captured the topics that were brought up at the last meeting, so I think it was Commissioner Hull, Tim, I think that you mentioned the transit-oriented zoning, so if you want to elaborate on that and offer any specific language beyond noting that topic, we could incorporate that. We also have the MDOT Complete Streets or Vision Zero policy for road construction, and Bradley, that might have been yours.
That was me.
And then the signage for bicyclists to be included in the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, R411, may use full lane was omitted from the Michigan MUTCD, but is shown in the FHA. So that one, I think, gives a little more clear direction to what policy it is that you're looking to change.
Can you just help me with the language? I don't know what it, I mean, is that good enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess if there's any others that work more closely with the council policy agenda committee as far as what they're looking for, then feel free to speak up. Either, I don't know, Mr. Lazarus, if you are aware of what they might be looking for, or if that's sufficient. But my impression is that the third bullet point about the MUTCD change gives sufficient direction. I'm not sure that the other two bullet, I think if you could offer a little more in terms of what the request is.
So I did a little research, and I think that MDOT already has a complete streets and Vision Zero statement of some sort. I just like to see them do that, like on Main, for instance, when that project is discussed.
More about like adherence to, would you want to say?
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be
adherence to?
adherence or, I don't know, I see a lot of nodding of heads on that side of the room too. Maybe you guys can help me with language. I'm sort of looking at you, Raymond. Greater adherence? I don't know.
Implementing, moving forward, how's that?
Yeah, I think oftentimes, my impression has been that state departments of transportation oftentimes will pass a complete streets-like statement, but it doesn't have the same weight behind it as other guiding documents that are referenced typically in road design and you know, so I think adding more teeth behind, you know, that sort of thing, that it has more implications for funding and implementation, I think are some of the considerations. Or making it more process-driven, right? So, you know, I've seen complete streets approached in two different ways. I want to say one of the Carolinas, South Carolina and North Carolina, received a lot of attention a while ago for a very robust kind of design guideline, design standards, that when you design a road, this is what it looks like. Then I've seen other places where it's a policy approach, where you say every road starts with the assumption that it's going to accommodate everything, and then if you can't or won't do that, you have to kind of rationalize why. And that has to have some level of accountability, right? So you have to have some decision-making body kind of authorize that you aren't going to, you know, accommodate a certain user. You know, so for example, we're not going to accommodate transit users because there's no transit on that roadway. That, you know, is a kind of obvious one. But then there might be other things like, well, we can't put in a bike lane because they're historic structures and we can't, you know, widen the roadway to accommodate it, you know, those types of things. So I think it's really, you know, I've seen it kind of approached from both directions. The impression, again, I'm not overly familiar with MDOT's policy on complete streets, but I think it's kind of general, I think, in nature, and so it maybe is not quite as closely adhered to as what I think others in this room might have, you know, hopes for.
So I'm going to reserve that discussion for when it comes up for us to work on. Is there any,
At the state
do we
level,
know enough to be able to make a statement about this?
you should know, the Department of Transportation had within it a complete streets group put in by the Granholm administration that in Snyder's first term got disbanded for reasons that they cited. Everyone knew what complete streets were by then, so there's no reason to continue with that commission.
We're going to be a lot more, I think, aggressive in trying to shape state policy. I referenced Assistant City Administrator Fournier before, and he has already been more active in Lansing, and we're going to push to not just react and keep bad things from happening, but be a lot more positive. Not to steal Ms. Griswold's thunder, but she's talked about us being very active in pushing for more standard crosswalk guidance around the state, so that what we're trying to do is also echoed around the state. We are going to join other cities of our size and press the state to live up to its obligations, so that when there is a state trunk line or a state roadway where that runs through the heart of a city, that they put the money up for more than just resurfacing the status quo and putting the burden for cost on the local entity. When we talk about fix the darn roads, we need to define what that means at the local and state level, so it's, you know, all users. So we do address complete streets as well, and then make funding available not just to fix the highways and the interstates, but to address the impact of poorly designed interchanges and what that does to local communities as well. So those are aggressive policy and funding directions that we want to move in, both on our own but also with allies around the state, and make this not a partisan issue but a traffic and motorist and pedestrian safety issue, because we all have the same concerns. And quite frankly, too many times MDOT's default position is no, and we've got to get them to be yes.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about MDOT, and I can't help but think of this ongoing, like, I mean, I know there are other issues like that. The fact that MDOT streets, we can't do anything with until MDOT says okay, and like the thing on Washtenaw with the crosswalks, where there's not a crosswalk going one way, so you have to cross 3 times, and this has been kind of sitting in limbo for 2 years, and Like, yeah, I think that getting these issues resolved with streets that are under MDOT's purview is definitely something that should be noted.
So I'd like to focus the discussion on the fact that we're trying to come up with policy statements
Right.
that are due tomorrow.
I don't know if we need necessarily the second one then, other than to the MDOT complete streets. They already have that policy, and perhaps just verbally saying, I appreciate the aggressive efforts.
Well, I think
Or we can take a leadership role in,
the concerns that
implementing
you
them.
have, whether they're a small or a large, it's the opportunity to express those. Ms. Griswold is on the policy agenda committee as well, and whatever it is that you want to recommend, Kayla and Raymond will take the notes, and we're going to integrate it into the policy document that will advance as part of the budget, and we're going to be more assertive with the state government than we have been in the past. So nothing's too small, nothing's too large, that you would think we should pursue at the state and the federal level.
Great.
Does that make sense for you, Kayla? To then be able to work with that?
Are you interested then in keeping the existing statement? It would help me, I guess, if you could recap, as a commission, what is it that you would like to move to the policy agenda committee?
What I heard is that we want to further influence MDOT in adhering to this complete streets and net vision, and Vision
Okay.
Zero
That works. I can include that.
in slightly better language than that. Yeah, Kathy?
I'm not sure exactly how to frame it, but strengthening our partnership, so it wouldn't just be MDOT, but it would also be the Ann Arbor Public Schools, the University of Michigan, and I think that there's some overhead in doing that, so it's probably a statement that we need to recognize. And the other one is making data-driven decisions, and so ensuring that we have accurate ongoing crash statistics as well as benchmarking. And I know that the Michigan Daily ran an article recently about Hill and Washtenaw and that intersection and all the crashes. And again, that's a MDOT location, but we need to be more aggressive in working with them to ensure that our citizens are safe.
Are those two additions agreeable in general? I see head nodding, so I'll go with
Okay.
that. Okay. Then can we trust Kayla to rework this a little bit and go ahead and submit it? I'm willing to go with that.
And then if I may, were there any additional thoughts on the transit-oriented zoning to make sure that
Yeah,
the
I don't
exception
know.
is in?
I'm kind of thinking that somehow, I brought this up, I don't know that it seems like the policy agenda is more oriented towards like policy on the external legislative. I think there could be some things there, I just not sure, because I thought I brought it up, and I guess I might have misunderstood what this
Okay.
committee, I know the commissioner, I think Trudeau was offering some comments about this, but I guess he never followed up, but,
Well, if it doesn't fit here, we'll fit it in another place where it's more
yeah,
appropriate.
yeah, I think maybe this isn't the right place, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Policy agenda, because I look at the rest of this, and this all has to do with like state and stuff, and,
Or broader visioning, yes.
but I thought it was, yeah, I mean, maybe this is there, but I'm just wondering, is this all supposed to be for the council's policy or the council's policy in lobbying the state?
I have that same question.
No,
Because-
it's our policy work that focus, but
Yeah,
it's not going to be all-inclusive at all. It's not even going to be close.
yeah. Because I know that the transit-oriented zoning, it came up before here, like, and I think I brought it up because, yeah, I just,
Okay.
I mean, I don't necessarily think it should go. I was just saying that I'm not sure because all the other stuff has to do with stuff on the state level, and I'm wondering,
Well,
is
if
this
it's-
just supposed to be stuff on the state level?
No, it's not. But if it needs to be fleshed out still, then I think we need
Yeah,
to wait
well,
for it.
I know that we had a presentation about a year ago, and, or maybe not quite a year ago, and then we didn't hear anything more on it, and I'm kind of wanting to see more details and have it
Okay.
come back. And
Well, we'll be talking about the work plan shortly, and
yeah,
that would be
maybe
a great
that's on
time
the
to
work
talk about it.
plan.
So I will plan on removing transit-oriented zoning from this policy agenda document, but we'll come back to the discussion about a follow-up on that, perhaps with city staff as a work plan item. Because that was February of 2018, I believe, that the Alexis DeLeo from the planning department came to speak about transit-oriented development.
Sorry, so are you asking to remove the transit-oriented development? Given that this is a policy document, not just for state policy, but also for city policy?
No, we don't have to remove it. I was just saying, I'm wondering, I just started wondering, is this the right place for it? Because I see all this other stuff has to do with
Right.
state policy, and I'm,
I'd like to keep it and
Yeah,
and
yeah, I
learn more
wanna
about
keep
it.
it.
But
So you want to keep it as written?
is that okay with?
Well, I think there is a role because a lot of the TOD initiatives really address land use and our ability to enter into agreements for voluntary agreements for more density, for affordable housing, and for other uses. So to the extent that you need those to have an effective transit-oriented development zoning, then it is certainly appropriate for us to pursue at the state level. So this does not preclude the commission from bringing things up through the year. What the purpose really of why the committee was formed was to get consolidation and consistency of message so we can have the one voice approach. Our elected officials deal with electeds at higher levels on a continuing basis. It's good for us to have them put forward the same message we're doing through the state bureaucracy and as we deal with elected officials throughout the state. So that's the purpose of it. It's better to have more thoughts than fewer thoughts and to do the things that protect the ability of municipalities to act and not be constrained.
So I'm hearing that we want it both.
Yes.
that-
Yeah.
To include it still and also develop it more as, at the work plan later on.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, as a non-voting member, but just a part of this committee, I wonder if it makes sense to have kind of an aspirational statement of what this committee wants to do and how they want to participate. And it might mean taking a little bit more time. I understand the due date's in 2 days, but maybe it makes sense to just at least have a statement of aspiration of what we want to do with safe, reliable, frequent, whatever, transit-oriented development, whatever it might be. But I don't know if that's the right place here, but that's what it feels like because we want to be getting our message across to the council of how we want to participate.
Which could be taken from the charter that developed the commission in the first place. That actually already exists.
Okay.
So if you want to suggest that, and that is in the annual report right now, so if you want to quickly look at it, but,
Well, if it's already there, then fine. I'm just trying to think of
well, we can include it in this policy statement. That would be an addition.
if you think it makes sense.
So if I could maybe just throw an idea out to see how it resonates, to maybe build off of Steve's suggestion, something to the effect of encourage policy and investments in land use and transportation that encourage transit-oriented development. Something I think is, if I'm reading the room right, that seems to be the direction that folks would like to see. And I think it's, there's a policy element that, is zoning and things like that. There's infrastructure investment. TODs also need multimodal access beyond just transit, walking, biking, all of those things. So I think trying to capture all of that in a succinct way so that the policy committee kind of understands where this group is coming from.
Are you suggesting that to replace Stephen's comment and also about the transit zoning comment?
I just meant to augment, just to kind of put
Okay.
some words around the 3 words that are on the page here, something that can be forwarded on. So again, not trying to
Okay.
dictate, but just trying to capture what I'm sensing folks are saying.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding to that. So if it's sufficient for Kayla, then we can add that.
Great.
Kathy?
Just for clarification, we're saying we want that policy to be considered. We're not saying that we want transit-oriented corridors built throughout the city. Coming from the second ward, where there are buses, like, there's a bus that goes down Arlington. But are we saying that we want high-density housing built on Arlington based on our policy statement, or are we just saying we want it considered?
I think what we're saying is we want to have the tools available at the local level where they're appropriate to encourage the kind of density that'll support transit and in a transit-oriented development type approach. It doesn't fit everywhere in the city.
Right,
But it's we want to, rather than be precluded from having inclusionary zoning agreements, we want to be able to have those because it supports the density you need to provide transit.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're
wouldn't it
way
be-
over time at this point, but
Yeah, I mean, I would think it would be focused on high-frequency transit as opposed to just, there's a bus down there, let's have high-density development there. Like, I would think it would be, because I know when they talked about the policy, when they presented it in like February, they were talking about like Plymouth and Washtenaw and somewhere down on like State and Ellsworth. And I would think it would be mostly oriented towards places like that.
is that clear from what you got, Kayla? Yes. Okay. Any other urgent comments on this before we move on? And we're trusting Kayla a great deal to represent us well, which I think is warranted. Okay. So suddenly there was enthusiasm for policy.
Took me a couple of months to figure out what it was.
Okay. We'll try and do better next time.
I mean, I'm new. I don't know what anything is.
That's a really good reason. But we're all new, so. I think the next agenda item is the annual report. Yes. So you have a copy of that. and I'm hoping you read all 42 pages.
Most of it should be familiar. A lot of attachments and things you've already done.
Yeah, mostly it's the first page that's relevant for that. We're just looking at any comments or suggestions, additions, anything like that, so that we can actually formalize it next month. We didn't want to formalize it this month because we wanted to include the value statement from the Micromobility Committee and have it be a whole year.
Great.
Rather than, here's our annual report for every month except December. So any comments, critiques? The staff did a phenomenal job on pulling that together. I really appreciate that.
I'd second that. I was thoroughly impressed at this document. So I didn't know who did it, but thank you very much. Was it mostly Kayla?
Well, it was Linda Diane who prepared the content. I pulled together the attachments of the things, but based on a list that Linda Diane. So she's giving staff a lot of credit, but it's really a lot of her work. And then Henry Outlaw is our latest community engagement support intern, and he gets credit for the formatting, which he pulled together on a very quick turnaround.
You did a great job.
That's great.
On Monday afternoon.
And Robert was enthusiastic. So nothing to add or change or anything like that? We'll bring back a finished document that we can just approve next time? I think it captures our work quite nicely. And we'll have to find out if it's the best annual report of any commission. See, I'm not as modest as you think. Okay, then we will go on to the work plan. And we allowed 15 minutes for this? No, 10, yes, 15 minutes. What I would emphasize, as Kayla sets this up, is that this is absolutely a work in progress. And so we can add things, we can take things away. It's basically an outline that we have as a tool, and we get to decide how we use that tool. So throughout the year, we can change it.
So we have a draft work plan, and we pulled together some standing items that the commission's been looking at on an annual basis. So you'll see things like the CIP, budget. Another repeat item is the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant award announcement. Cynthia came last year and gave a brief discussion about that. We anticipate the same for this spring. So a few items that are kind of getting to be part of our routine agenda, annual agenda, and then also working with staff across the engineering department and reaching out to other organizations, looking at what the DDA is doing. We contacted the Ann Arbor Transit Authority, various items from trying to get, I think even U of M. Steve, I don't think I got your addition incorporated yet, but I got your email on Monday, I think, about adding in a U of M item as well. So we're trying to include as much as we can, but understanding that this will continue to evolve throughout the year as new projects come up, or we realize there are other topics that the commission is interested in focusing on. But at the same time, now is a good opportunity if there's something that you know you would like to see incorporated, such as transit-oriented development, if we want to bring that discussion back and check back in where are we at as a city, this organization, what progress has been made since our February discussion last year, we could easily incorporate that into the agenda as well, or into the work plan. So this does evolve, but this gives me and Linda Diane a basis to work from each month. Whenever we try to plan the next meeting agenda, we can refer back and see, what was anticipated and is that still valid. So I welcome any comments. Yep.
So I really appreciated the update we got from the schools last month, a couple months ago. I would love to see that be an annual. I don't know if maybe annual is too much, but I think enough is changing right now that I think an annual is. Okay, I'd love to see that come back next fall.
Great. Does that sound all right, Liz?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we did it last year, so I assumed it would be on it again this year. So.
Okay, yes, we will make that now a recurring annual item, and we'll look for a date sometime in the fall, perhaps. Great. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the transit-oriented development, obviously, I know, we had talked about that in the previous topic, but that should probably come up at some point to see, are they looking at it and talking about it. And the other thing would be AAATA. I know they're in here for the Get Downtown and Arbor Bike, but I know they were talking about doing some kind of planning as far as service development, as far as doing outreach as far as possible changes, and they were looking at doing something related to that after the millage passage, which happened back in August, and I'm wondering if we might want to bring them back at some point when they're ready to talk about that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
And I'm also wondering about the RTA. I mean, I don't know if anything's going to end up happening for that, but it very well might, and if it does, that might be of interest.
I will reach out to our commissioner, who gets announced during roll call. We do have an RTA seat on the commission, so I will reach out and see if they'd like to give us an update.
Yes.
Just to address some of the service expansion, there was some service expansion from the ride around Eastern's campus, but that's just an update. Maybe I can bring more details about that even to the January meeting. to get more specifics to present to the commission.
You said it was around Eastern's campus?
Yes.
Oh, and I had heard they had like increased the service on the Route 4 in like January, but I'm talking about more bigger, more long range.
More
not
strategic plan.
Like for like a couple years down the road or something, just.
There was a strategic plan document released by the RIDE in September, maybe when the new budget was announced. They went hand in hand. That was more of a long-term,
Yeah.
5 to 10 year, and it wasn't very specific. So I can get some more information from Matt and see what we can bring back to the commission.
Coordinate it with Gaylor as to when.
This is partly a question because I don't know if we've ever talked about snow removal before, and I don't know if that's really poking a bear, but it's something that I've wondered about a lot as a citizen in this city as it relates to transportation. I don't know if others on the commission would be interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, we did. We've had a presentation, it's probably at least a year ago. I don't remember exactly, but we could look at that as something to revisit.
I've also wondered about, I know sidewalks have been talked about a lot lately. I mean, like, I know, like, as far as like sidewalks, like installing them and replacement, and I know like the big thing that's come up has been this, like how homeowners have to pay an assessment when they decide they want to build sidewalks by them, and wondering like, yeah, is there any alternative way to do sidewalks? And just because that actually came up in the snow removal too, how snow removal and sidewalks always get assessed to the homeowner that happens to live right by there, and that's come up a lot, and I'm wondering, like, yeah, if those could be worth discussing.
And I'm mostly wanting a context for that, for sidewalks and snow removal, that, no, when it comes up, it's like, do we want to make a statement, a policy? Do you want to just get information about the current status? So we need a little bit more context rather than just, some of us have spent so much time talking about sidewalks and snow removal. We need a little bit more
And if that's
reason to do it
already been-
again.
And that's fine. I wasn't sure if it was something that the committee or the commission had talked about before. I'm
But it's
fine
still an
with
issue.
doing it.
It's still an issue.
Sure.
I mean, I could provide you, Molly, with the link to the presentation that was done previously about snow removal, give you a chance to look through what has already been discussed with the commission, and then if you can follow up with more, what is it in addition? Are you looking for an update on current status? Has anything changed in the last year? Or is there some policy discussion that you'd like to put on the table?
And include the pedestrian safety and access task force information as well.
That'd be great.
Howard?
There are a lot of things that have been brought up that are part of an overall operations review, so it may be helpful to just push all those together and have Molly come up and talk about field ops from Public Works.
Yeah.
And you can touch on all these. Yeah. Molly from Public Works. And talk about all those things in general. One of the opportunities to do that may also be during the budget review, because that we'll talk about. But as much as snow can be a four-letter word, I think it's reasonable to expect discussion about how we're making changes. You can also talk about how we're addressing pavement repairs during that time, and maybe get an update on the status of our pavement asset management. So those are some things that may be grouped together for a fun evening of discussion with pavement engineers.
Yeah, the other thing is, I know they've been talking about a partnership with Snow Buddies, and I know that Disability Commission has that's been brought forward before, and I'm wondering, like, are they doing that this year? Is there being any expansion? And I know they were talking about some pilot program, and
So we can find out the status of that. Other additions, and you don't have to do them all tonight. You can do them later too, but Kathy?
Council passed a resolution earlier this week, the Crosswalk Improvement and Maintenance Plan, and included in that is a staff report. There are a few things that are going to be presented by January 31st, and one of them is an inventory of significant crosswalk assets and assessments of their conditions with respect to design guidelines, including markings, signage, and illumination. So I would think that would be of interest to this body, and that'll be available January 31st. There's also a resolution recommending the existing local crosswalk ordinance language to Lansing as a state law, and that's been referred to the policy committee, and we're going to have an engineer explain exactly how our ordinance works and some benchmarking with other communities. I know Kalamazoo just passed an ordinance in the last couple of weeks that's going to be implemented in the middle of 2019. So I don't know if that's a discussion this group wants to have.
I think Kayla and I should talk about that in the context of what the commission's already made a resolution about, and
Okay, I know
the
you.
dates and the timing and.
Oh, okay, because I would hate to delay it, but I think it's important for this group to act as an advisory group to council on transportation-related issues.
Right, and we have
Right.
commented on the crosswalk.
Yeah, so I would second, agree
We
with
can
what
bring it
Linda
up if we
Diana
need
said.
to.
We have taken action previously about the crosswalk ordinance, but if there's something new and it's going to council again, then it's
Well-
worth talking about whether it should come through the transportation.
Okay. Yeah, this group has reaffirmed the existing language, and that's what's in the resolution.
Great. Then we'll look at that.
So the question is, do you want it to come back to this?
Come back,
Yeah.
okay. We'll
Group
look
or
at
not?
that and.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm about ready to wrap this up. If there's anything else pressing to add? And keep the ideas coming all year. Most of us will be here all year, I think.
Okay,
Thanks, Kayla.
thank you.
Oh, am I in the wrong place?
Okay.
I'll get there.
Then I believe Raymond's up next. Is that true?
Yes,
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'll be giving you the monthly transportation project update report. As is par for the course, I'll go through and just kind of highlight the changes from last month to this month. So there are a fair number that I'd like to draw your attention to. The first is, as the construction season kind of is finishing up for the most part, we're trying to scurry and button up the projects that we can. So under the annual street resurfacing project, you'll note that most of the work included in this year's project was completed with a couple exceptions, those being Windstone Drive and then repaving along Ann Arbor Saline has also been deferred till spring, but everything else is pretty much done that was originally identified. We used to have a section on Pauline Boulevard that has been taken out because that project is completely done, open to traffic. I think we had mentioned in a past meeting that the finalized striping will be carried out next year. It's standard practice for the city to do just paint, and then we followed up the following year with thermoplastic. So this first year, that's the paint application was done, but the thermoplastic will go down next year. Scioto Church, unfortunately, kind of a series of unfortunate events prevented us from finishing that project this year. But it has been reopened to traffic for the winter, so it's been kind of restriped. But the final touches on the project will be completed in the spring as soon as the construction cycle reopens up. Let's see. Next one is the Fifth Avenue project. A similar sort of situation where the project has kind of been reopened for now. Concrete work is done and the temporary pavement markings have been placed, but it's expected, well, it is actually reopened today. I think today the striping crews were out there today striping the project, and the remaining work will be completed in spring of 2019. There's some new language under the North Maple Road restriping on page 2 towards the bottom. There was a public workshop held on December 13th where we asked residents along the corridor, users of the corridor, to give us feedback about where crosswalks could and should be located. Had about 30 people attend. It was a pretty good workshop, and we will be following that up with an online opportunity for folks to provide similar input. There's also been a website created for the North Maple project that you can go and find some project history on it and see if there are any opportunities for public engagement. Okay. Scrolling down to page 4, under Nixon Road, I think last time we, gave you some updates about a second round of public meetings that were held on October 24th. Right now, what we're doing is we're just continuing to receive feedback, both in terms of paper surveys that people may have picked up from the workshop, but there's also an online survey to collect additional feedback that's available online till December 19th. And so this is just kind of a little bit of a shout out to anybody who wants to find out more information about that project. If you just go to the city's website, /Nixon, you'll be able to access that survey there. Till today, I guess. Today's the 19th, so hurry up. You have 3 more hours. Little blurb added on page 5 about the Duvarn sidewalk gap. Right now we're tentatively scheduled, or we anticipate having a meeting, public meeting scheduled for late January. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm sure at the next Transportation Commission meeting we'll be able to give you an update about what the actual date and location of that meeting is. The Fuller Road sidewalk extension, there's some new language towards the bottom of that, on bottom of page 5, that talks about how it was taken to council, and it passed, but then it was reconsidered at the December 3rd meeting and tabled, and ultimately a direction from council was for staff to complete a comprehensive analysis of various potential improvements to the existing crosswalk. So that'll be entered into the conversation the next time it's presented to council. Let's see. There's a little bit of discussion about some of the DDA's projects, so the People Friendly Streets project and the annual bike parking. So under People Friendly Streets, I think we may have told you this before, but if you haven't heard, Huron Street and William Street are kind of being fast-tracked for implementation in 2019. So that's pretty exciting, especially on the William Street for the city's first cycle track to be on the ground next year, and the DDA is working diligently to try to meet that timeline. There's some mention about bike parking installations and how there are 32 covered bike parking spaces in some of the parking structures to allow for year-round covered bike parking, since the DDA pulls up the bike corrals, the on-street bike corrals, they pull those up, but this is a way to allow people to still continue to park downtown with their bicycles. The bottom of page 7, there's some discussion that's been updated related to the Ann Arbor Station, that work is finally resumed on the preliminary engineering and environmental review for the Ann Arbor Station. So again, this just started to kick off again, and so we'll be providing updates as that project progresses in the future. And I believe that represents... one little blurb, one little change that is worth noting is the traffic calming program was approved on November 19th by City Council. So I think that was a couple days after your last meeting. It was presented to City Council and it did pass. So we do have a new traffic calming program in place, and right now staff is in the process of kind of updating the cover-to-cover document so that as new petitions come in, they have kind of a succinct document that they can refer to that gives them all the steps of what the program entails. All right. There was also, at that same meeting, last city council meeting, we had presented the Lower Town Mobility Study for consideration, and we had gotten some direction from council to kind of go back and see if we could bring the cost down. There was a little bit of, I think, sticker shock in terms of what the proposal came in at, and so council said, come back to us in January to see if you can bring that cost down. And so January 21st is when we're expected to take that back. And I think that really is the extent of the major things I wanted to highlight. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Yeah, so I saw, I mean, the MDOT thing I mentioned earlier about, well, Washington on Pittsfield. I know that we haven't gotten an update on that in quite some time, and I'm kind of curious, did they do anything this year, or are they just still in limbo?
Okay. I don't have a good answer for you, but I can follow up with some contacts on Washington. We're also in discussions with them about the Washington on Hill intersection as well, because of some of the discussion that's been happening as of late in the MLive report and others, some of the email chains.
All right. I have a question about the Allen Creek berm.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that the exact same language has been used for all the updates for about a year now. And so I'm getting a little concerned as to, that's supposed to start in spring of 2019, which is hopefully really soon. Is this real? What's happening?
My understanding is the city has every intention to move forward with that project. That the two biggest things that the city is working to iron out right now are these easements with two
Right.
property owners. But the funding is in place, as I understand it, for the construction. The design has been done, and so it's really
Right,
just
that's what it said for over
Right.
a year.
right. So.
But do we need to intervene in some way to help or make this happen, or is it not as stalled as it looks like, or?
Let me, if I can interject.
Lifeline.
The easements with MDOT, I think, are completed. There is an easement with a property owner that is not. We've done the appraisal on the property. That's in the process of being finalized. So hopefully that'll all go well, and we'll be able to do the project next year.
Okay. If we can help in some way, or then,
I think it's
Let us
better.
know.
It's a better offline conversation.
okay. Kathy?
I had a question regarding the Fuller Road crosswalk, because I don't see in the description here staff's commitment to complete the promised improvements at the current location of the crosswalk. And I believe that was in the council resolution.
I think the council resolution asked us to look at both locations and come up with the cost summary to do it at the current location, and the time frame was not less than 180 days. I think that's what was in the resolution.
I'll reread it and send you an email then.
But I will, and the conversations internally are, we want to do that a lot faster to get a decision made, because as is the case with other projects, there's a ticking clock on grant monies. So 180 days would kill that. So there is some urgency to get it done sooner.
Oh, okay. And there was the need for a refuge island identified a couple of years ago after the fatality there. And I know that was delayed because of the discussion about the move. But anyway, I will get clarification regarding the resolution, because I'm very concerned that we need a refuge island there. And one of the issues is that our local crosswalk ordinance only requires a car to stop in the existing half of the roadway and not on the other half of the roadway until the pedestrian is coming so close as to be in danger. I can't remember the exact
Right,
wording,
we
but
went
that
over
is
that, yeah.
extremely scary, and that's not the case in other ordinances and other state laws where cars either have to stop both ways, or they at least have to stop when the pedestrian is in a given lane as well as the next lane.
Okay. There's some follow-up there. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Raymond and Liz might be able to chime in too. I'm just wondering, the Northside Steam, what process is that in at this point? You know, I know that there was a resolution passed to keep moving forward, but then I read in the paper today that there's lawyers getting involved and threats of lawsuits and all that. So I'm trying to gauge. I had a really great conversation with a number of people involved. How much flexibility is there on Traver?
Traver.
Council approved the a resolution for us to submit the drawings. There's a discussion that came up about whether or not we could do some minor curb line to provide some on-street parking in a particular case. Staff's come up with some alternatives to incorporate that. So all the work that we're going to do is in the public right-of-way based on the most recent design, so I don't know what the lawsuits would be about. So between now and towards the end of January, we have to submit the drawings final drawings to MDOT.
So those final drawings, are those firm, or can we do little tweaks?
It's a good discussion to have. I would say if you have little tweaks, we can probably talk about it, but you know, just in general, you have the mantra, other people's money, other people's rules, as I brought up to council. So this is an MDOT program where they have certain rules for what has to go in, and in order to qualify for the grant, which greatly discounts the burden on the homeowners, we have to follow the rules of the Safe Routes to School program. So as the council approved us submitting the drawings, the actual assessment won't be done until in the spring, later in the spring, and that's where the impacts will be known for sure. Council does have the ability to set the cost recovery period for the assessments, which gives some cash flow relief to property owners, but the drawings themselves are in a pretty near final state.
Any other comments, questions? All right, then we'll move on to liaison reports from anyone who is representing an organization. Anything?
Oh, I'll go. Yeah, Disability Commission met today. They're talking about possibly giving some feedback on the e-scooters and the other micro-mobility, because that's why Larry Keeler is going to be on the micro-mobility committee. Yeah, he's going to report back to us, and then we may pass a resolution regarding the micro-mobility and ourselves.
Great. Very relevant, yeah.
I don't know, the Ann Arbor Public School report is attached. I didn't know if anyone wants me to go over it, or if you have any questions about the attached report. I'd be happy to go through it, or just entertain questions.
Well, at this point, I'd say questions.
Great.
If there's any questions about it. Thanks for including that. We had asked for that, and that's great. No curiosity, though.
All right,
Oh, go ahead.
I have curiosity, if I can turn this on. So when, I'll make it a more general question. When a major change to traffic patterns is made, I'm wondering how the assessment of that change goes in terms of future adjustments. So my kid goes to Bryant, and it's been interesting.
It's only 3 days.
Oh, I know.
So generally, the way these processes work is that we have a Safe Route to Schools team within each school, and we assess what the situation is, and then we meet, and we usually do engage a member of the city's traffic engineer, and either Sergeant Clark or Officer Adkins also help with that. And we have been looking, I'm a former 9-year Bryant parent, and so the traffic plan there has been switched around many times. And so specific to that plan, we were looking at a way to pull traffic off and queue them off of Champaign through Santa Rosa, and then work through the buses in a different way. So, we make the changes and we tweak them as they go if we need changes. And we usually need to give it, a bit of time to work through because it's always asking for behavior changes. And in fact, I'm going to be over there Friday morning again and working with the team as we think about some tweaks to that. And so it's, but each school has their Safe Route to School teams. Some have more needs than others. Some schools are much more landlocked, and so we have a lot more gridlock in those areas. So we try to look at a bunch of different solutions, including some remote drop-offs, and really working on the bike and walk plan. So it's very unique to each school property, each school campus.
Thank you.
Great. All right, any commissioner reports, individuals? Yeah. Yes.
So the city clerk's office engaged in some administrative archaeology and discovered a long-buried council resolution directing the administrator to hold an appreciation event every year for our board and commission members. So that is scheduled for January 19th. Hopefully you've all received an invitation to be held at the Michigan Theater, 10 a.m. It's a Saturday morning. Hopefully a good time will be had by all. There'll be thrills, spills, and surprises. So if you have the opportunity to attend, we'd like to recognize your service to the community.
Very nice. Anyone can top that? Kathy?
I think I covered all of the topics that the City Council has been working. I just want to express appreciation for Cynthia's report today, and especially because it began with the word consistent.
All right. Great. Any items for next time's agenda? We have a work plan, but you can mention them now or in the next couple of weeks for Kayla or I. Nothing coming up right now, that's good. But the floor is open for the next couple of weeks.
We will have the 2019 street resurfacing presentation. There are a number of projects, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think Stone School is one of them. I was going to say Boardwalk, but that was one that is no longer on the list. So I'm looking at Bradley because I feel like he knows probably more than I do. But anyway, street resurfacing will be on the agenda for January. That will be the main presentation item for discussion.
Plat and then the roads behind Mac Open. Open Mac? I always get this.
Mac Open.
Mac Open, yep. The neighborhood back there.
Waterhill. Most of us call it Waterhill. All right. Then if there's no objections, I will call the meeting adjourned. See you next year. Thank you for a good year.